And what I'm going to try to talk today is this sense of beginning and possession. In fact, I've just heard that this place where we are sitting, this very building, is a wonderful new beginning. I had no idea that this library had been destroyed by Hurricane Hugo. And look at it now. See, we are sitting in what I'm talking about. That they could have reconstructed this library, not simply the building, but the books, is a miracle of recreation. And I want to talk about that because my own work has been involved in that, what we have to call miracle. And secondly, I'd like to say that, you know, we are so happy to be here with the Caribbean writer. This is the first time that a journal, a Caribbean journal, has been able to host a meeting of Caribbean people. And that is a very historic moment. We had, the first one was in 1972 when CariFesta first hit the Caribbean. That was a wonderful time. For the first time, Caribbean writers from all over the world came back to the Caribbean for the first time and met together for the first time and spoke to each other for the first time and were able to meet Caribbean people on their own soil for the first time. That was wonderful. More recently, we had a meeting in Jamaica on Caribbean culture in honor of Rex Nettleford. And again, it was the first time after 1,000 years, practically, that we have been able to speak about our own culture. And now for the first time we have this meeting that is hosted by a Caribbean journal. So you see, we are beginning to move. We are beginning to get into hallelujah. And that is very warming and good to be here. The other thing I want to say is that I want you to know about my work. That's one of the things. I feel I ought to account, as I have become now an elder, obviously, getting honors. I think I also have to account to you what is happening and to let you know, where I stand and how I begin to develop my ideas. And in addition to the two trilogies which you know about, the first trilogy is The Arrivant, Rites of Passage, Mask, and Island. There's the second trilogy, Mother Poem, Son Poem, and Excel. And that should be called Ancestors when it comes together. But believe it or not, we were speaking about publishing today. Although, you hear about these prestigious awards and all that, I have great difficulty with publishers. For some reason, they really don't like my work. I can't tell you why, but there's a problem. The second trilogy, which should be called Ancestors, Oxford University Press, that published the book, instead of publishing Ancestors, have told me that they will happily give up the rights of the book so that I can find another publisher for it. Now that is like stepping into a trap door. That having had a publisher for so long, you suddenly find you don't have that publisher at the moment when this second trilogy should be available to everyone. So that is the kind of problems that we face. Why is it that you are betrayed by a publisher? Why is it that you're betrayed by nature, as happened in Hugo? And why is it that sometimes we are betrayed by our own imagination? Those are the things. But since that second trilogy, I've written a book of a diary called The Mexican Diary, which you may or may not have heard of. I'm going to make these names here. There's a poem called Shower, which is written about the effect of the Hurricane Gilbert upon my cosmology, and therefore Shower corresponds to your Hugo poems coming out of this country. Trench Tongue Rock. I pause here because that is perhaps the most important work of all. Trench Tongue Rock is about when I was murdered, when I was left for dead, and what happened after that, how you come out of that experience, which is what we're talking about now. And then the coming out of it is described in a collection of stories, poems, I don't know what you call them, called dream stories. In fact, that's what I call them, dream stories. And these dream stories were published by Longman Publishers here. Another book that you hardly find, and you have to ask why, Dream Stories. They published it willingly but grudgingly. And they did not publish it the way it should have been presented. All of this we have to talk about, you see. Publishing is fine, but then when the publishing is not what you really intend, there's a problem. By the time I came to Dream Stories, as a result of what I'm going to tell you, I had developed another technique within my writing, which I call the Sycorax video style, in which I try to visualize hearing. In other words, instead of simply an auditory experience of the poem and oral, I try to put on the page what the song looks like. And I'm using the computer, I make all sorts of things happen on the page. Things like this, if you can see. Right? Now, to do this, you really require a mural. You require a larger space than publishers of the 20th century apparently are prepared to provide. This is the format of the 20th century utility. 4 by whatever it is, 4 by 3 by 4 or whatever. Whereas the video style requires 12 by 50. You require space. You require space. It's a mural. It is a mural of the imagination. And the publishers refuse, you know, they said a larger book would not fit kindly on the shelf, or would not fit appropriately on the shelf. It would not be part of their format. And so I had to spend the whole summer collapsing these dream stories into this rather crowded page like that. That's not what the message is about there. But at least Dream Stories was available. And then I published, as an act of revenge in a way, my own video style, a large book called Barabagian Poems, which I really hope you have in this library. I couldn't bring Barabagian poems with me because each copy weighs a ton. It's a mural. You walk around with a mural. But from time to time, I published it myself, so here is where the publishing and the author coincide with each other. And that is an example of the video style. It's also a poem or a collection which is involved with a reconstruction of elements of disaster into another statement, into a new statement. And then there is the Rwanda poems, which I'm going to speak about today if there's time. Then there's Mrs. Solemnis, none of these published yet, but that is a poem that deals with the middle passage. I try to describe this middle passage in every detail that I can. I've never done anything like that before. Then there are the Oya Nile poems. And finally, there is a piece, a large piece on Caribbean cosmology, which is where I will begin. Because when I was here last in the Virgin Islands, the disasters that I refer to had happened to me, but I did not understand why, and I had no sense of cosmology to relate them to. One reason why I was happy to come, and why I feel I must come, is that I have since understood the nature of those disasters, something of the nature of those disasters, and placed them in what I call cosmology, right? Now, by cosmology, we're speaking about what happens when you close your eyes. What do you see behind the eyelids of vision? What goes on in the sky of your head? How do you relate yourself, in other words, to the sun and to the planets, to moon, darkness, tides, to root, green vegetation, to people? What kind of wheel are you turning within larger wheels? Every insult to any of those wheels, as you know, becomes an insult right through the system to yourself. And any effort to heal yourself hopefully returns that healing to the outer channels, the other circles. In other words, a restoration of the cosmology. If there is no cosmology, there is a creaking of organs. There is a discord. There is no wheel. There is no fluidity. There is a limping action which results in discord, and in discord, the word that we use now is dis. All of the disses that you can think of is the result of that. So that cosmology is very important. And for us who have been imported into the Caribbean, where all our cosmologies, European, Amerindian, African, Asian, have all been distorted, and where we have been trying to create a new cosmology composed of all of those elements, and where we have hurricanes that destroy those cosmologies, and earthquakes which do, and a volcano in Montserrat which tries to do. It is so important that we understand what cosmology means, where we are in relation to the sun, as I said, where we are in relation to our sense of ancestors, where we are in relation to spirit forces, where we are in relation to home, and to whom, and to whom for, and where we are in relation to each other, where we are in relation to each other. And that is what I am more increasingly aware of. And the poetry has led me to what I'm telling you now. I'm not just making it up with any sociological or anthropological or imaginative sense. I'm talking about what the poetry has told me to tell you. And that is where it is. Now the first cosmology that I was aware of was the cosmology that led me through the Arrivants and through the second trilogy up to Sun poem. Excelf, the third poem of that second trilogy, was already a signal of an intrusion. That's why it was called, see, I didn't know that. I said, why am I calling this poem Excelf? Not knowing that I was about to experience a whole dislocation of self, which this poem presaged. But up to some point, the second of that second trilogy, the cosmology consisted of circles of friends, circles of friendship, circles of social relationships, circles of occupation, dedication to certain things one had to do, and finally the circle of society, nation, culture. 3, 4, or 5 concentric circles, at which at the center was my notion of the maroon, the place where you would retreat, you could retreat, you should retreat for reinvigoration, for reconsideration of activity, for solace, and for regeneration. The maroon history of the Caribbean led me to that notion. Of all the Caribbean efforts at self-realization and independence, it is the maroon experience which is the unique one. And an experience which we tend to downplay, which we tend to submerge. But the Maroons of Jamaica established their independence. The Maroons of Suriname still cling to their independence in 1996. The Maroons of Palmares developed a kingdom in northeastern Brazil for 100 years. The Maroons of Dominica and St. Vincent became the Black Caribs, and they resisted the French and the British until the time of the French Revolution. And then they were set up onto a eradication business with the British and the French, and the survivors were sent, as you know, to Belize, Honduras, to the Mosquito Coast, where instead of dying, they have become the Garifuna, very powerful new factors in the Caribbean cultural scene. And above all, we have to understand that it was the Maroons of Haiti. It was not, as C.L.R. James often said, it was not Toussaint Louverture reading Caesar's Gallic Wars that really created the victory of the Haitian people in that revolution. It is the fact that the Haitians, the people of Santo Domingo, of Saint-Domingue, including Toussaint Louverture, called upon the resources that were already there in the Black Mountains separating Haiti and Santo Domingo, called upon the resources of the Maroon tradition in that country, which created an alternative to Napoleon Bonaparte and which led to this remarkable victory. So Maroon is very important to this. And I had developed this kind of cosmology for myself, out of which I was writing. And I want to read a poem here, which is perhaps the last poem I wrote out of that sense of, let us call it idyllic cosmology, the sense that you could get better all the time, that as you continue to be faithful to your work, the world will become greener, the flowers brighter, your recognition sharper, your usefulness more appropriate and apparent, and so on. That, you know, from the vibration from yourself radiating outwards would help to create the new world, the revolution, whatever you want to call it. And I had built a house in the mountains of Jamaica, which was designed for this purpose. That would be my maroon retreat. That would be my umfor. It is from that house that I would retire from teaching at universities and so on, taking up 3/4 of your time, and devote all myself to literature, to the development of the artistic craft. That is what I had intended. And the house was built, and the archives were placed in the house, the library, the records, the collection of things dating back from when I was in Ghana. You see icons from all over the world, all collected in a cosmological order, so that I could write anything just by imagining how the books were on the shelf. You know, that kind of way, when you want to remember a name and you think of the look of the room you write from, and you remember the name. That's an aspect of cosmology, all that. And I remember there was a bamboo clump outside the window at the house at Irishtown. And it is looking at that bamboo, I began to write this poem, which is called Flutes. And you'll see, the images here are very optimistic, they're very lyrical, and they relate very intimately to nature. Is when the bamboo, from its clip of yellow grown and wrestle, begins to glow, and the wind learns the shape of its fire, and my fingers, following the termites' drill, drip into their hollows of silence, shatters of echoes of tone, that my eyes close all along the walling, all along the branches, all along the world, and that creak of spirits walking these graves of sunlight, spiders over the water, cobwebs crawling in whispers over the stampen green, find from a distance so cool it is a hill in haze, it is a fish of shadow along the sandy bottom, it is a butterfly alight the blossom, and that the wind is following my footsteps all along the rustle, all along the echoes, all along the world, and that stutter I had heard in some dark summer freedom startles and slips from fingertip to finger stop, into the float of the morning, into the throat of its sound. It is a baby mouse, but softer than the suck it makes. It is a hammock sleeping in the shadow. It is a hammer shining in the shade. It is the kite ascending chord and croon and screamers. It is the cloud that curls to hide the eagle. It is the ripple of the stream from bamboo. It is the ripple of the stream from blue. It is the gurgle pigeon dream, the grung dove's coo. It is the sun approaching midday, listening its splendor. It is your voice, a light with echo, with the bright of sound. That's the poem through. Right? So you have to try to remember that candlelight effect of a poem. Soon after I wrote that poem, my wife, who is at the center of this series of circles, died suddenly. And I wrote a Mexican diary as an effort to understand what was happening. It is as if the light of the bamboo goes out. And it is not a death that is foretold. It's not one of those kind of things. It is when a doctor looks at you and says, she only has 6 weeks to live, all of a sudden, that kind of thing. So a light goes out, everything begins to shut down. And what happened to me in the middle of that series of circles is that, of course, you could not find the circles. You found yourself increasingly, the circles are now beginning to implode upon you, and it is you against the circle. The circle is becoming vicious, right? And I found I could not even write at that time. As the pressure of collapsing cosmology affected me, so my writing hand began to seize up. Instead of being the curlew which writes, it becomes a fist, becomes like stone, and the hand goes like that, and one couldn't write. Now, that is why I was fortunate eventually to discover the computer. See? Because instead of being able to have a fist and create the sculpture of the word, I could use a little finger and tap those keys, and miracles would happen on the screen electronically. But that was still to come. What happened here was this implosion of cosmology, which resulted in a seizure of literature. And then, 2 years after that, Hurricane Gilbert destroys the entire the entire house where the love resided goes, and that bamboo clump is covered under some 60 foot of mud. And to get to that house, or the ruins of that house after the hurricane, I had to descend through a valley of mud into the windows of the house, or the ruins of the house. So I understand how you feel about Hugo and what you feel here. The thing is that everything is destroyed. The cosmology has completely gone. And the poem that I wrote to echo that, and I just read you a brief section of it, is this sense of reduction. And all this, reduced to all this, to so little this, to so almost nothing like this, in the shattered cess of the storm, to this nothinglessness, in the thistle and ceaseless like ceaseless drip from the sky of my roof, with the rafters of stars, wrought, glistening, 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 all through the long night, spit on the spot where we never sleep, because the water, water, water all the time, glimmering, 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 phantom from, up from the steep of the valleys of Marley and old Marcus Garvey, their children, clambering, clambering, clambering over the land, slidering, mountain-like, ceaseless-like, thesis-like, senseless, like Orlando Patterson's Children of Sisyphus, clambering out of the ghetto. That is what's happening there. Those glistenings within the poem, those glistenings within the poem are the one hope that I have that something will slide out of that holocaust. Those little cracks of light that is expressed by ceaseless thistle, those songs within the poem gave me hope. I did not know they would, but they were there implanted in the poem as a possibility out of darkness. That's the only thing the cosmology had, this little slippering and slidering. And when I came to do dream stories, I discovered that I was like a snake on the floor of a cane field, and that the only way I could progress was to make S's of song along the floor of that cane field. And that there was no light except the little arrows of cane giving a signal that there would be a direction somewhere at the end of the S. But that was not the end of it either, because 2 years later I am murdered in Kingston, Jamaica. Pow! Gun at the back of the head. So that you are seeing someone who is really not alive. Or perhaps it might be the other way around. I don't know. I don't know. But when the bullet goes through your brain like that, or should have a dream bullet, and it turned out to be, I suppose, you see, there's a tunnel there through which it was possible for the I, for the EO, to go through. It is like taking a needle, and when you put the little thread in your mouth like that, and you put it through that little hole, you miss, and then you put it in. That is the one possibility in this poem. Let me read to you, though, what I wrote about this moment, because it is the final destruction of the first cosmology. Up to then, I still felt that we had a culture, which was, we have this thing about our culture is one of warmth, friendship, circles, brothers, Caliban, that, in other words, that we don't kill each other. That is what I felt the logic of our culture would be. We might kill Prospero if we could, we kill the oppressor, the colonial, but here in this room, we are all together, shoulder to shoulder, breathing the same dreams. So that when I was murdered by my brother, this was the end of that original cosmology. I didn't know how to cope with it. And also the materialism of the murdering, because so many other people died and there was nothing, there was no lament, no one was writing elegies, no one was remembering the death or the deaths. Let me give you an example of what I began to recognize. One day I was in the library and we were planning cultural events, and there was a shot outside and we saw a young man collapse on the ground, bleeding, of course, into the gutter. And the person who had shot him came along with his jack boots, and we were looking at all this through the window, right? And he wanted apparently to identify who the shot, dying youngster was. And instead of the instinct, I would think, is that you go down on you kneel next to the body and you turn it over to see the face that you had obliterated. But instead of which, this jack-booted person, who could be my uncle, right, took that jackboot and started to kick at the dying figure until it turned over under the force of the kicking, so that when the face turned over, half of it was bashed in by the boot. And everyone stood around and absorbed that. There was no cry, there was no attempt to say no. We who looked through the window looked, but we didn't jump through the window. There was this silence of acceptance. And I realized that the culture was in terrible crisis if this is allowed to happen. Another day, when Pelé came to play in Jamaica, a young man, after Pelé had scored a goal, ran onto the field, which you're not supposed to do. It was also a state of emergency, and the police went for this young man, and they were also going to jackboot him to death. When the miracle that happened at that moment is that Pelé himself threw himself between the boots and the youngster, and because he was there, they didn't kick anymore. But I'm saying that if we have a culture that goes to that extreme, the whole sense of brotherhood, that the culture is somehow unique and beautiful, is under threat. It doesn't mean that it is no longer there, but it means that the person suffering these things, in this case myself, has to undergo a reconsideration of it. You know, what is the culture that we are so proud of? This sense that when my wife died, you find that no one comes to say hi. And when the archives are destroyed, no one comes to say, shall we help you dig in the mud? And when this young man is knocked down by the police, no one falls over his body to protect. Why is it that this culture, which is supposed to be so caring, has become, at the moment of crisis, so uncaring? Is it that the Middle Passage itself eroded what we thought we had, more than we thought we had? You know, these are crises of question. We have to ask, I have to ask the question, and I echo it back to you, because you yourself must recognize in your own lives moments such as that, when the culture does not seem to support the individual. Mystery killings at apartment complex. As the latest wave of killings in the corporate area continues, 3 men, including a policeman, were slain at an apartment complex in the Kingston area in the early hours of Sunday morning. This is a newspaper item. 2 of them were tied with their hands behind their backs, then shot in the head. One of those could be Brathwaite, because soon after this, the same people, I assume, came for me. My hands are behind my back in that same way. Dirty cloth stuffed into your mouth, a dishcloth in fact, and then the gun to the back of the head. Residents in the area heard shots at about 2:30 a.m. and called the police. When the police arrived at these apartments, they discovered the body of this person. Further investigation revealed the body of the apartment security guard inside his station with his hands tied. And now I begin my commentary. Yes, he was dead in there. The door locked in upon him, lights not on, now on. He crumpled down upon his back upon the narrow cement floor, his hands tied up behind his back, his feet like under him and also bound, the dead eyes staring, the face not even twisted by the fatal blow, a big red plop and poppy on his chest, among the hairs still thick and softly leaking out and leaking out and leaking out, his chair half broken with the sudden sunless backward crash. And then with the sun coming up, right on the green embankment, right on the green embankment under my window, between, in fact, the freeze my car made with the bank, so squeezed and unexpected there that no police had even seen it with their candles. It was a third, blue jeans, chest naked, hands bung behind his back with 2 dishcloths, for goodness sake, taken no doubt from the apartment clothesline, and with the sun coming up, coming up, coming up, The police ask, no, order me, abrupt and violent as any crime, to roll my car away. And then they rolled him over like a stone, and from the stain of dark green blood upon our grass and sepulchre, and they untied his dishcloth hands behind his back and let his arms fall free. He was a policeman, a big, dark, meaty guy whose job, it seems, was checking on security at this same apartment. But I can't tell you what he looked like. The features, the human face, I mean, both eyes shot out, stabbed in, his nose unhinged, a huge gash in the right side of the throat, his tongue there black and smooth and half leaf out of his face as if he'd strangled also. Yet all his skin and flesh still firm and natural, like if he flashed and living still, and not an ant or insect coming even near his blood. And no one say a prayer, at least out loud, nor pause, nor raise the hum or hymn for any one of us, that night, that early morning, Sunday. And so it goes on. And they rolled that body away to disclose this thing, and they asked me to, he was hiding, he went under my car, you see, to hide himself. So the police made me reverse my car away from the body, and there it was. And then my car was on television. And 2 weeks later, the same thing happens to me. Right? So that is the circle of that kind of situation I'm talking about. And finally, another glimpse from this terrible book, really, you know. And this is what I have to live with, or, you know, this is what you... The place where I was living after these experiences, you see, when things get to this stage, you have to employ wolves to protect your property. And the place where I was living was a kennel for these wolves, these dogs. They prepared them to become savages in order to protect people from the experience I'm talking about here, these murders. And I want to let you understand how the training is done, what happens to the trainer of the dogs. By now the age of distress, despair, and disrespect. Distrust, disrupt, destruction. A gardener cut lashes off a helper's hand for saying that he should not come in there and take the employer's food. The friends he entertained laugh after him for letting the woman diss him. They break into our finest literary editor's home one night and place her carving knife between her teeth and force it forward, 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 slicing the boundaries of skin that mark her lips, that let her snark and smile and speak, until the dark blade reached the skull. You never knew a human tongue could be so red and look so long and gurgled with such flame. These are the inscriptions that one is forced into. And your reaction is what I'm talking about, that you have to write this is no joke. Near where I write this now, a man is training dogs to guard you or to kill you. Seen? He stands in naked smoke in his ramshackle yard of galvanized and cast-off wooden kennels, a long whip in his tethered hand, his jackboots on, the animal like tied to him by leash and lash and violence. He grieves the dog an order, and it disobeys. He hits it wham, wham, wham. The greyhound howls. The others rise and crash against their cages in despair. Hout, 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 howl. The tails aggressive and yet crazy in their primal fear. He barks again. The animal howls back and disobeys. He strikes again, then strokes the fire, smoke, more smoke, a crackle in the fury. He strides within the noise he cannot hear and lashes out and howls again. Does he have wife and children, mother, close friends, red distant relatives? What if he sees his daughter coming down the road? What if he hears his granny calling home? The leash dog howls like human baby in its terror. Sparks squinting from its lurid, tearless eyes of error. Wham, 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 command. The salivating canine howls and leaps and tries to break away. The black whip turns it back and almost breaks its back. It howls again and staggers, almost grovels as the man commands, until the thin bitch whimpers, tail comes down and falls, till in that silent yard only the fire burns. I had to write it. Now, after that, or during that, all this, Rwanda became the images that come on television, the most horrible Holocaust that is in my living memory. And you see again, it is a crisis of our culture, because one has said so much about Africa. One has said so much about the brother. And here is brother murdering brother out of, it is not Bosnia now, right? It is not Belsen now. It is not Prospero's doing now. It is what's happening between Caliban and Caliban. And how do you cope with that? How do you cope with that? Well, the first thing that happened to me was that throughout all this, the image of the stick, apart from the sound of the ceaselessness, the image of the stick was a permanent presence in the poetry. The stick of the ruins of the Umfor at Irish Town, the stick with which these people beat their dogs, the memory of a dead wife, all of these created the image of the stick. And I kept on remembering my poem, Limbo, which is about a stick stretched across space. Limbo, limbo, limbo like me, limbo, limbo like me. And in that poem written so long ago, I had started to recognize, because you see, the metaphors lead you to a recognition of history. That's what happens in my case anyway. It is not that the history leads you to the poetry. Poetry leads me to the history. That limbo stick which we celebrate in the nightclubs is in fact a celebration of the Middle Passage. And the limbo stick which is lowered every stanza is the increasing crowdiness on the slave ship, the stick itself being the dark deck of slavery. So this poem is about the dark deck of slavery, the limbo stick. And the memory of that passage, which is what I was on to now. What I'm writing here, what was happening to me since the destruction of the first cosmology, was that I found myself upon a 20th century middle passage. I began to realize that, and that I was involved with this limbo memory, limbo lack of memory, what George Lamy calls erasure of memory. But limbo also means something else in the form of lembe. It is also memory through water, and a more positive memory. And so what was happening to me was that the loss of memory and the memory of it was creating another possibility of threshold. I didn't know any of this, but every time this stick appeared in the poetry, it led me to one more understanding. Don't forget, the stick is something on which you lean as well. So this little crutch of stick of memory allowed me to get through these poems. Even the hand, which was like granite, was able to clutch that stick in this way. So you limp through a new series of possibilities. And even into Rwanda, this stick becomes, in fact, increasingly important in order to get through the poem. And I began to recognize certain other things, that the loa, because you see now the cosmology is turning into something else, and I have to begin to use these words, the loa that is at the crossroads, is at the threshold, at the X, is Papa Legba. Papa Legba leans on a stick of memory, stick of doorway, stick of threshold. The stick can mean so many new things here that I begin to follow that possibility. But as I started to write Rwanda, a review came to my attention. And I begin the Rwanda poems with that statement. And then I will, at the same time that Rwanda was happening, another set of destruction was taking place within our culture in Haiti, where the refugees were coming out of that country, the very country that had provided the first independent black republic in the world, for goodness sake. Here you're having the opposite of that independence, and all of these people coming out of it, and trying to cross the straits to El Dorado in little shells and on little feathers, so cruel. So I have to talk, all of these things are me. All of those things that I have described, I'm now seeing in the external world. And I only have a stick to go with, a little crutch there to help me through, and the video style which is beginning to emerge. So first of all, I lash out at the critic, because very often I find that the metropolitan critics, and I have to say ours too, because now I recognize that ours are not much different than the others. All carry these daggers, these Brutus-like daggers, things like that. But that the responsibility of criticism is awesome. And as we speak about publishing, we also have to speak about criticism, because here are people in a shuttered world, which is what we all are in. My experience is now reflecting onto you. The people in a shuttered world needing little beacons of light, little footsteps to get out of the morass, to get out of the ruins of the hurricane. And so often a critic comes along and swipes everything away, without understanding the nature of the cosmology of the survivor. You get these authoritarian statements. It does not conform to this. It does not read like this. It is not enough like new criticism. It does not deconstruct. They're not concerned at all with these little incidents that take place that make you write with that particular confirmation. They're interested, as Archie was saying, with a global view, perhaps, or something, but it's a destruction of effort. And we have to be very careful about it, and therefore enter into a criticism of the critics. understand where they're coming from. So I started off, when I started writing these Rwanda poems, some critic must have seen them, and he gave another swipe of Brathwaite. An antiseptic critic in London or New York who loved Derek Walcott, and why not? And the restrained poems of Ian MacDonald on the great Essequibo River, says of my work, poor lute, poor ragged five-string fingers of my star guitar, that I celebrate sad thing, apparently bad thing, what he called, quotation, the seemingly endless purgatorial experience of black people. The seemingly endless purgatorial experience of black people, which is what it is. It is seemingly endless, and it is purgatorial. As I said, when I thought the purgatory had finished, I was into a second phase of it. So I know that the experience is there. As long as that middle passage remains, as long as we have not thrown flowers onto the graves of the middle passages, the dead will continue to float towards the shore. So that when I come here and I attempt to go into the sea, I am meted with the tears of those dead on the day before All Souls. You know, this is what happens. So it will be endless until we find a way to create a new beginning. Where is the end of the endless wailing? But that is nothing to be ashamed about. So no critic has the right, I would say, unless the poetry is bad, which is a different thing, no critic has the right to deplore the seemingly endless purgatorial, because it goes on and on and on. Haiti might recover, and we'll have another set of boat people coming out of somewhere else. And if it is not from our own culture, it's from somebody else's culture. You know, the thing goes on and on. How much time? And when I look up again from this crowded boat, this is the Haitian experience now. After talking to that critic, I look up and I see this crowded boat filled with my brothers and the single star of my sister. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter scowling above us. The scull in front of us capsizes, screams, calls, cries. The green tide ruining us all the way back to distant Dakar. See, here in this, right here in this place you are, St. Croix, you know, on the edge of the Atlantic there. What I'm saying should be very, very close to you. Any craft that you set in the water here can go back to Dakar, could also go further into the Caribbean, but you know, the breadth of Africa comes right across here to this place. The drought that you have comes from the Sahara Desert. The green tide ruining us all the way back to the distant Dakar, to the dungeons of the Cyclops, Gore, 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 Gore. The salt in my eyes of rainbows, my hope fading faster than my heartbeat, the water like silkworms now in the channels of my mind, in the cracked ghastly tunnels of my lungs. There is a huge globe around me like the moon. There is a dead sun breathing somewhere in the cracked glass of this endless morning. And I see this drift, this green, this coconut perhaps from Guave, from Gonaives, the little black head bobbing on the water. And I lean over the sleep side of our boat, titled already into all these depths, into all these passing deaths, these, yes, endless purgatorial passages, if you can call it that. This swift catch from the sea in my hand, held up like a dolphin or lantern, or like Papa Agüe, weeping, weeping, weeping. from the fresh salt tears of the sea. This little boy in my hand, like a dolphin but not dead, drowned, you have seen him on TV. Just that glimpse, just that shot dripping with history, clear out of the water for all our howls to see. Did any of you see the picture, that particular one? There is the boat drifting to El Dorado, either to Miami or to Dakar. And on television, this little coconut suddenly appears on the screen, and the young man and that Haitian craft, the gunwale of the boat, just 6 inches from the water, leans over with the sea almost into the boat and pulls that coconut from the water. And it is not a coconut, but a little child. That is the image I'm using here. This boy, this little boy in my hand like a dolphin but dead, drowned, you have seen him on TV. Just that glimpse, just that shot dripping with history, clear out of the water for all our howls to see. His hands folded politely before him, his soft sea body hanging heavy, swinging quietly from like the old clothes hanger hunger of my mind. The green shirt that his dripping mother dressed him in, his eyes closed, his mouth as if it never knew drowning, as if he would open his eyes out here on St. Croix water, as if he would smile, as if the Atlantic would shine from his mouth like the new winding morning he dreamed of his father, the carpenter, of his mother, the owl. And all the world waits, the world watches, as I drop him back down with the splash, let me say it, with the splash that he never deserved, back into the water that he never deserved, that he never deserved, that he never deserved. And you chide me for chanting like this, for lamenting this seemingly perpetual program and program like this. This season on season of persistent enemy like this, for trying to ghost words to holler this tale, that he will swim back to Africa now he's drowned, that the shadow of this Coast Guard cutter of blockade has nothing to do with his coconut head and the cost of his arms folded, sleeping in salt. In a little Spanish town was on a night like this. Girls were sitting down and around the tongue like this. Watch them, fold their arms like this. In a little town, a little boy drowned like this. And so it goes on. Now I have to come to when the poem begins to turn the corner. If not, you'll be here for a long time and you still wouldn't know what happened. And then we will try to stop. See? When the poem reaches the lowest position in the mud, when the images become so stark that I have to begin to edit them myself for fear that the critic will say more. I come upon a new image which was not there before. And it is of this woman, this Rwanda woman. And it's amazing how so much of this, you see, comes from television. But everything that I see on television, I have seen in my own life. So it's not that it is a figment of any imagination. This woman comes on television and she has a stick in her hand. And I recognize that woman as my mother. I call her Oya. You see, the names I'm using now are all from from voodoo, all from the other cosmology, which I have not even described yet. But she is Oya. She has this stick in her hand. And you know that as I watch her on television, this woman dies before the face of the camera. The cameras actually participate in her death. She is so hungry, she has walked for so many hundreds of miles perhaps, that on her very stick you see her death arriving, and she sinks down on the stage, on the screen, and she dies before the cameras with the stick left at the right angles, preserved forever as a photograph. That stick is the same stick, limbo, 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 like me. I hear the echo all the time. Who would forget this icon of my mother, Oya, as she falls, dressed in the colors of the earth, her death, defense, her definition. How far from where she born, how lonely now from wells, from walls, sweet sound of roasting corn. What little can we do for her but witness where she sinks, starved, shot, ruined, staved in, savaged by Europe and her own breathless people's stinks. Hutu, Tutsi, Luo, Kimbali. It does not matter now, has never mattered now in far-off Delhi, echo of Mombasa. It has not mattered in all those country churchyards where you muttered poetry, those Parthenon mosquitoes, memorial plinths and marble graveyards, the Ashtroom Canton River, Ellis Island, Robbins Island, Sherwood Forest, Rima, Trenchtown Rock, the Scarlet Letter Villages, Motown, and MTV. Only it seems Aretha's flying voice will reach her hair before she falls, crumpling slowly into the silence of her own mouth, empty of rain, empty of corn, empty of comfort, thirsty beyond thirsty for water, that should have come forth into the dark of her ancient and ageless Umfor. The stick that could have been her husband in her hand, her past, her future patio, her ancestry's hair, her tall black concentration spirit, the 1,000 years of stars she walked upon slips slowly from her like the water of the river where she had seen them, those 100,000 bloated, once black bodies, white as flour now, come to the ledge of one green world and pause as they must, as they should, as you know they never could, and then fall heavily, heavily over the falls with hardly a splash in that pain and piranha of water. Deep, dark now, everly inverted pyramids of Goma, Kagera, skulls slowly becoming pebbles in that long lime river of the twisted time. Aquala, Aquala, La Fania, La Fania. And she becomes this gong, this fading icon of your television set, moving slowly away from the lure of our world like a leopard of no sound in its cameras. Her eyes never open again, never closed again. In your legba, your lemba, in your giver of wires, in your howler of dog's ears, on this pain, on this threshing floor, leaving her black stick leaning towards you like an open door. Limbo, limbo, limbo like me, limbo, limbo like me. Thank you.